Good morning once again. Welcome back. I actually really enjoyed doing the poems, so I'm going to start reading a book. One of my favorite books, actually. Fahrenheit 451 by Ray Bradbury. Let's begin. This is the 60th anniversary edition. Fahrenheit 451 by Ray Bradbury. Introduction by Neil Gaiman. Introduction by Neil Gaiman. Sometimes writers write about a world that does not yet exist. We do it for 100 reasons. Because it's good to look forward, not back. Because we need to illuminate a path we hope or we fear humanity will take. Because the world of the future seems more exciting or more interesting than the world of today. Because we need to warn you, to encourage, to examine, to imagine. The reasons for writing about the day after tomorrow and all the tomorrows that follow it are as many as varied as the people writing. This is a book of warning. There's a reminder that what we have is valuable and that sometimes we take that value for granted. There are three phrases that make possible the world of writing about the world not yet. You can call it science fiction or speculative fiction, or you can call it anything you wish. And they are simple phrases. What if only, if this goes on. What if gives us change, a departure from our lives? What if aliens landed tomorrow and gave us everything we wanted, but at a price? If only lets us explore the glories and dangers of tomorrow. If only dogs could talk. If only I were invisible. If this goes on is the most predictive of the three, although it doesn't try and predict an actual future, with all its messy confusion. Instead, if this goes on, fiction takes an element of life today, something clear and obvious, and normally something troubling, and asks what would happen if that one thing became bigger, became all-pervasive, and changed the way we thought and behaved. If this goes on, all communication everywhere will be through text messages and computers, and direct speech between two people without a machine will be outlawed. It's a cautionary question and lets us explore cautionary worlds. People often think, wrongly, that speculative fiction is about predicting the future, but it isn't. Or if it is, it tends to do a rotten job of it. Futures are huge things that come with many elements and a billion variables. And the human race has a habit of listening to predictions for what the future will bring and then doing something quite different. What speculative fiction is really good at is not the future but the present, taking an aspect of it that troubles or is dangerous, and extending and extrapolating it into that aspect into something that allows the people of that time to see what they are doing from a different angle and from a different place. It's cautionary. Fahrenheit 451 is speculative fiction. It's an if this goes on story. Ray Bradbury was writing about his present, which is our past. He warns us about some things, and some of those things are obvious, and some of them, half a century later, are harder to see. Listen. If someone tells you what a story is about, they're probably right. If they tell you that is all the story is about, they're very definitely wrong. Any story is about a host of things. It is about the author, it's about the world the author sees and deals with and lives in. It is about the words chosen and the way those words are deployed. It is about the story itself and what happens in the story. It is about the people in the story. It is polemic. It is opinion. An author's opinion of what a story is and what is about are always valid and always true. The author was there, after all, when the book was written. She came up with each word and knows why she used that word instead of another. But the author is a creature of her time, and even she cannot see everything her book is about. More than half a century has passed since 1953. In America, in 1953, the comparatively recent medium of radio was already severely on the wane. Its reign had lasted about 30 years, but now the exciting new medium of television had come into ascendancy. And the dramas and comedies of radio were either ending for good or reinventing themselves with a visual track on the idiot box. The news channels in America warned of juvenile delinquents, teenagers in cars who drove dangerously and lived for kicks. The Cold War was going on, a war between Russia and its allies, and America and its allies, in which nobody dropped bombs or fired bullets, because a drop bomb could tip the world into a third world war, a nuclear war from which it would never return. The Senate was holding hearings to root out hidden communists and taking steps to stamp out comic books. And whole families were gathering around the television in the evenings. The joke in the 1950s went on, and in the old days you could tell who was home by seeing if the lights were on. Now you knew who was home by seeing who had their lights off. The televisions were small and the pictures were in black and white, and you needed to turn the lights off to get a good picture. If this goes on, thought Ray Bradbury, no one will read books anymore. Obviously wrong. And Fahrenheit 451 began. He had written a short story once called The Pedestrian, one of my personal favorites, about a man who is incarcerated by the police after he is stopped simply for walking. That story became part of the world he was building, and 70-year-old Clarice McKellen becomes a pedestrian in a world where nobody walks. What if firemen burned down houses instead of saving them, Bradbury thought. And now he had his way into the story. He had a fireman named Guy Montag who saved a book from the flames instead of burning it. If only books could be saved, he thought. If you destroy all the physical books, how can you save them? Bradbury wrote a story called The Fireman. The story demanded to be longer. The world he created demanded more. He went to UCLA's Powell Library. In the basement, there were typewriters you could rent by the hour by putting coins into a box on the side of the typewriter. Ray Bradbury put his money into the box and typed his story. When inspiration flagged, when he needed a boost, when he went to stretch his legs, he would walk through the library and look at the books. And then his story was done. He called the Los Angeles Fire Department and asked them at which temperature paper burned. Fahrenheit 451, somebody told him. He had his title. It didn't matter if it was true or not. The book was published and acclaimed. People loved the book, and they argued about it. It was a novel about censorship, they said, about mind control, about humanity, about government control of our lives, about books. It was filmed by Francis Truffaut, although the film's ending seems darker than Bradbury's, as if the remembering of books is perhaps not the safety net that Bradbury imagines, but in itself another dead end. I read Fahrenheit 451 as a boy. I did not understand Guy Montag. I did not understand why he did what he did, but I understand the love of books that drove him. Books were the most important thing in my life. The huge wall screen televisions were as futuristic and as implausible as the idea that people on television would talk to me as if I could take part in if I had a script. Fahrenheit was never a favorite book. It was too dark, too bleak for that. But when I read this story called Usher 2 and the Silver Locust, the UK title for the Martian Chronicles, I recognized the world of outlawed authors and imagination with a fierce sort of familiar joy. When I reread it as a teenager, Fahrenheit 451 had become a book about independence, about thinking for yourself. It was about treasuring books and the dissent inside the covers of books. It was about how we as humans begin by burning books and end by burning people. Rereading as an adult, I find myself marveling at the book once more. It is all of those things, yes, but is also a period piece. The four-wall television being described as the television of the 1950s variety. Shows with symphony orchestras and lowbrow comedians and soap operas. The world of fast-driving, crazy teenagers out for kicks. An endless Cold War that sometimes goes hot. Of wives who have appeared to have no jobs or identities, save for their husbands. Of bad men chased by hounds, even mechanical hounds. Is a world that feels like it has its roots firmly in the 1950s. But still, the heart of the book remains untouched. And the questions Bradbury raises are still as valid as important. Why do we need the things in books, the poems, the essays, the stories? Authors disagree. Authors are human, fallible, foolish. Stories are lies, after all, tales of people who never existed and things that never actually happened to them. Why should we read them? Why should we care? The teller and the tale are very different. We must not forget that. Written ideas, they're special. They are the way that we transmit our stories and our thoughts from one generation time to the next. If we lose them, we lose our shared history. We lose much of what makes us human. And fiction gives us empathy. It puts us inside the minds of other people, gives us the gift of seeing the world through their eyes. Fiction is a lie that tells us true things over and over. I knew Bradbury for the last 30 years of his life, and I was so lucky. He was funny and gentle and always, even at the end. When he was so old, he was blind and wheelchair bound, even then. Enthusiastic. He cared completely and utterly about things. He cared about toys and childhood and films. He cared about books. He cared about stories. This is a book about caring for things. It's a love letter to books. But I think just as much as a love letter to people and a love letter to the world of Waukegan, Illinois in the 1920s, the world in which Ray Bradbury had grown up and which he immortalizes as Greentown and in his book of childhood, Dandelion Wine. As I said when I began, if someone tells you what a story is about, they're probably right. If someone tells you that is all the story is about, they're probably wrong. So any of the things I've told you about Ray Bradbury's book, Fahrenheit 51, the remarkable Book of Warning, will be incomplete. It is about these things, yes, but it is about more than that. It is about what you find in between the pages. As a final note, in these days when we worry and argue about whether ebooks are real books, I love how broad Ray Bradbury's definition of a book is at the end, when he points out that we should not judge our books by the cover, and that some books exist between covers and are perfectly people-shaped. Neil Gaiman, April 2013. If they give you ruled paper, write the other way. Juan Ramon Jimenez. We're going to do chapter 1 tonight, and then we are going to stop. 1. The Hearth and the Salamander. It was a pleasure to burn. It was a pleasure to see things eaten, to see things blackened and changed. With the brass nozzle in his fists, the great python spitting its venomous kerosene upon the world, the blood pounded in his head. His hands were the hands of some amazing conductor playing all the symphonies of blazing and burning to bring down the tatters and charcoal ruins of history. With his symbolic helmet numbered 451 on the stolid head, and his eyes all orange flame with the thought of what came next, he flicked the igniter and the house jumped up in a gorging fire that burned every evening sky red and yellow and black. He strode in a storm of fireflies. He wanted above all, like the old joke, to shove a marshmallow on a stick in the furnace, while the flapping pigeon-winged books died on the porch and lawn of the house, while the books went up in sparkling whirls and blew away on a wind turned dark with burning. Montag grinned the fierce grin of all men singed and driven back by flame. He knew that when he returned to the firehouse, he might wink at himself, a minstrel man burnt corked in the mirror. Later, going to sleep, he would feel the fiery smile still gripped by his face muscles in the dark. Never went away, that smile, as long as he remembered. He hung his black beetle-colored helmet and shined it. He hung his flame-proof jacket neatly, and he showered luxuriously. And then, whistling, hands in pockets, walked across the upper floor of the fire station and fell down the hole. At the last moment, when disaster seemed positive, he pulled his hands from his pockets and broke the fall by grasping the golden pole. He did to a squeaking halt, the heels 1 inch from the concrete floor downstairs. He walked out of the fire station along the midnight street towards the subway where the silent air-propelled train slid soundlessly down its lubricated flue in the earth and let him out with a great puff of warm air on the cream-tiled escalator rising to the suburb. Whistling, he let the escalator waft him into the still night air. He walked toward the corner, thinking little at all about nothing in particular. When he reached the corner, however, he slowed as if a wind had sprung up from nowhere, as if someone had called his name. The last few nights he had the most uncertain feelings about the sidewalk just around the corner here, moving in the starlight toward his house. He had felt a moment prior to his making the turn someone had been there. The air seemed charged with a special calm, as if someone had waited there, quietly, and only a moment before he came, simply turned into a shadow and let him through. Perhaps his nose detected a faint perfume, perhaps the skin on the back of his hands, on his face, felt the temperature rise at this one spot where a person standing might raise the immediate atmosphere 10 degrees for an instant. There was no understanding it. Each time he made the turn, he saw only the white, unused, buckling sidewalk, with perhaps on one night something vanishing swiftly across a lawn before he could focus his eyes or speak. But tonight, he slowed almost to a stop. His inner mind, reaching out to turn the corner for him, had heard the faintest whisper. Breathing? Or was the atmosphere compressed by someone merely standing there, very quietly there, waiting? He turned the corner. The autumn leaves blew over the moonlit pavement in such a way to make the girl who was moving there seem fixed to a sliding walk, letting the motion of the wind and the leaves carry her forward. Her head was half bent to watch her shoes and stir the circling leaves. Her face was slender and milk white, and in it was a kind of gentle hunger that touched over everything with tireless curiosity. It was a look almost of pale surprise, and the dark eyes were so fixed to the world that no move escaped them. Her dress was white, and it whispered. He almost thought he heard the motion of her hands as she walked, and the infinitely small sound now, the white stir of her face turning when she discovered she was a moment away from a man who stood in the middle of the pavement, waiting. The trees overhead made a great sound letting down their dry rain. The girl stopped and looked as if she might pull back in, surprised, but instead stood regarding Montag with eyes so dark, shining and alive, that he felt he had said something quite wonderful, but he knew his mouth had only opened to say hello, and that when she seemed hypnotized by the salamander on his arm and the phoenix disc on his chest, he spoke again. "Of course, you must be our new neighbor, aren't you? And you must be," she raised her eyes from the professional symbols, "the fireman." Her voice trailed off. "How oddly you say that." I'd have known it with my eyes shut," she said slowly. "What, the smell of kerosene? My wife always complained." He laughed. "You never wash it off completely." "No, you don't," she said in awe. He felt she was walking in a circle about him, turning him end for end, shaking him quietly and emptying his pockets without once moving herself. "Kerosene," he said, because the silence and bacon is nothing but perfume to me. "Does it seem like that, really?" "Of course, why not?" She gave herself time to think of it. "I don't know." . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . Do you mind if I walk back with you? I'm Clarice McKellen. Clarice, Guy Montag, come along. What are you doing out so late wandering around? How old are you? They walked in the warm, cool, blowing night on the silvered pavement, and the faintest breath of fresh apricots and strawberries in the air. And he looked around and realized this was quite impossible, so late in the year. It was only the girl walking with him now, her face as bright as snow in the moonlight. And he knew she was working his questions around, seeking the best answers she could possibly give. Well, I'm 17 and I'm crazy. My uncle says the two always go together. When people ask your age, he said, always say 17 and insane. Isn't it a nice time of night to walk? I like to smell things and look at things, sometimes stay up all night, walking and watch the sun rise. They walked on again in silence, and she finally said thoughtfully, You know, I'm not afraid of you at all. They walked on again in silence, and he was surprised. Why should you be? So many people are afraid of firemen, but you're just a man after all. He saw himself in her eyes, suspended in two shining drops of bright water. Himself dark and tiny in fine detail, the lines about his mouth, everything there. As her eyes are two miraculous bits of violet amber that might capture and hold him intact. Her face turned him now was fragile milk crystal with a soft and constant light in it. It was not the hysterical light of electricity, but what? But the strangely comfortable and rare and gently flattening light of a candle. One time, as a child in a power failure, his mother had found and lit the last candle there at a brief hour of rediscovery of such illumination that space lost its vast dimensions and drew comfortably around them. Them, mother and son alone, transformed, hoping that the power might not come on again too soon. And then Clarice McKellen said, Do you mind if I ask, how long have you worked at being a fireman? Since I was 20, 10 years ago. Do you ever read any of the books you burn? He laughed. That's against the law. Oh, of course. It's fine work. Monday, burn Millie. Wednesday, Whitman. Friday, Faulkner. Burn 'em to ashes and burn the ashes. That's our official slogan. They walked still further, and the girl said, Is it true long ago the firemen put out fires instead of going to start them? No. Houses have always been fireproof. Take my word for it. Strange. I heard once, a long time ago, that houses used to burn by accident and they needed firemen to stop the flames. He laughed. She glanced quickly over. Why are you laughing? I don't know. He started to laugh again and stopped. Why? You laugh when I haven't been funny and you answer right off. You never stop to think of what I've asked you. He stopped walking. You are an odd one, he said, looking at her. Don't you have any respect? I don't mean to be insulting, it's just I love to watch people too much, I guess. Well, this doesn't mean anything to you? He patched the numerals 451 stitched on his char-colored sleeve. Yes, she whispered. She increased her pace. Have you ever watched the jet cars racing on boulevards down that way? You're changing the subject. Sometimes I think drivers, they don't know what the grass is, or flowers, because they never see them slowly. If you showed a driver a green blur, he'd say, yes, that's grass. A pink blur, that's a rose garden. White blurs are houses, brown blurs are cows. My uncle drove slowly on a highway once. He drove 40 miles an hour, and they jailed him for 2 days. Isn't that funny and sad, too? You think too many things, said Montag uneasily. I rarely watch the parlor walls or go to races or fun parks, so I've got a lot of time for crazy thoughts, I guess. You ever seen the 200-foot-long billboards in the country beyond town? Did you notice that once billboards were only 20 feet long? The cars started rushing so by quickly they had to stretch it out so the advertisement would last. I didn't know that, Montag laughed abruptly. I bet I know something else you don't know. Does it do on the grass in the morning? He couldn't remember if he had known this or not, and this made him quite irritable. And if you look, she nodded at the sky. There's a man in the moon. He hadn't looked for a long time. They walked the rest of the way in silence, hers thoughtful, his a kind of plunging and uncomfortable silence at which he shot her accusing glances. When they reached her house, all of its lights were blazing. "What's going on?" Montag had rarely seen that many lights. "Oh, just my mother, father, and uncle sitting around. It's like being a pedestrian over rare. My uncle was arrested out of time, did I tell you? For being a pedestrian. Oh, we're most peculiar. Well, what do you talk about?" She laughed at this. "Good night." She started up her walk. Then she seemed to remember something and came back at him with wondering curiosity. "Are you happy?" she said. "Am I what?" he cried. But she was gone, running in the moonlight. Her front door shut gently. Happy. Of all the nonsense. He stopped laughing. And that'll be it for tonight, folks. Thank you for watching. Next week, I will do the rest of Act 1 here. Next week, I will do the rest of Act 1 from pages 7 to 67. Thank you.